Her hand closed around my arm just inside the school's front doors. Hard. The grip of someone going under, grabbing the nearest solid thing. I had never seen her before in my life. Dark, frightened eyes. A nice blouse she'd clearly ironed twice. A folder of papers shaking in her other hand. Down the hallway, a woman with a government badge stood waiting outside a classroom door, checking her watch. The stranger pulled me close enough that I could smell coffee and pure panic, and she said it fast and low. "I know this is insane. Please, walk in there and be my husband for the next 2 hours. There's a caseworker in that room, and my ex told them I'm an unfit mother, and my son," her voice cracked, "my son is watching through that window right now. If I lose this meeting, I lose him. 2 hours, that's all. Then you never see me again. Please, now." I had come to that school to fix a heater, not to save a child. Before I tell you whether I walked into that room, if you believe the person everybody wrote off might be exactly the one somebody needs in their worst moment, do me a quick favor and tap subscribe, because this channel is full of stories exactly like this one, and I'd hate for you to miss the next. Alright, back to that hallway. Let me back up about 10 seconds, because you need to understand who she grabbed. My name is Ryan Cole. I'm 35 years old, and I fix things for a living. Heaters, pipes, broken doors, the stuff that goes wrong in old buildings. It's steady work, quiet work. I go where the job is, and I keep to myself, and most weeks the longest conversation I have is with a hardware store clerk. I am, by every measure a man can be measured by, forgettable. Nobody grabs a man like me out of a crowd. That's the whole point of a man like me. We're the ones you walk past. There's a reason I'm like that, and it matters for this story, so I'll say it fast. 6 years ago I had a wife and a little girl, and when the marriage fell apart, I sat in a room a lot like the one down that hallway, across from people with folders and badges, and I watched them decide I wasn't enough. Too quiet. Too unstable, they said, because my work wasn't 9 to 5. I lost her, my daughter. I get a phone call on her birthday if I'm lucky. So I stopped trying to be a person people kept. I just became a person who fixed their heaters and left. That's the man Diane Foster grabbed by the arm. She didn't know any of it. She just saw a tall, steady-looking guy in a work jacket standing in a school hallway, and she was drowning, and I was the nearest solid thing. 2 hours, she whispered again, her grip shaking. Please, I can't explain it all. There's a woman from Child Services in that room right now, and my ex-husband told her I'm unstable, that I can't give my son a real home. And I told her. She squeezed her eyes shut. God help me. 3 weeks ago on the phone I told her I was seeing someone. That my son has a man in his life. A steady one. I lied, because I was scared, and now she wants to meet him. Today. And I have nobody. I have nobody, and my son is right there. I followed her eyes, and that's when I saw the boy. He was maybe 9, standing at the tall window of the classroom door, both hands flat against the glass. Dark hair, 2 big glasses, a striped shirt buttoned all the way to the top like somebody had dressed very carefully for something important. He was looking at his mother with a kind of hope that no 9-year-old should have to carry, waiting to see if the thing she'd promised him was real. And behind him, at a table, sat a woman in a gray blazer with a folder open in front of her, and a pen in her hand, glancing up at the clock on the wall. A sensible man says no. A steady, low-risk man says, I'm sorry, this is madness, I've got a heater to fix. That's the man the courts decided I was 6 years ago. And maybe that's exactly why I did the opposite, because I knew that room. I knew that table, and that folder, and that pen. I knew what it was to sit there and lose the only thing that mattered because you couldn't perform stable well enough for a stranger. And I looked at that boy with his hands on the glass, and something 6 years old and buried cracked open in my chest. What's my name? I said. She blinked. What? If I'm your partner, I need to know my name, how we met, how long. She's going to ask. Caseworkers always ask. I set my tool bag down against the wall. You've got about 30 seconds to brief me before we walk in there. Go. Something broke open in her face. Relief and disbelief and the first shaking edge of tears. Diane, she said. Diane Foster. My son is Marcus. We met 8 months ago. You can keep your real name. It's easier. Please, just. She grabbed my left hand suddenly, panicked. You don't have a ring. She'll look. She looks at everything. I looked down at my bare hand. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I reached into my jacket pocket, where a plain steel band had been sitting for 6 years because I'd never once been able to make myself throw it away. I slid it on. It still fit. Of course it still fit. There, I said quietly. Married man. Diane stared at the ring, then at me, and for 1/2 second the panic dropped clean off her face and she really looked at me. The way you look at a person you've just realized is an actual person, and not a prop. Why do you have a long story? We've got no time. Which door? She wiped her eyes hard, straightened her ironed blouse, and put her hand on the classroom door. And through the glass, I watched her son see us. I watched Marcus see his mother walk up with a man beside her, a man wearing a ring, and I watched that little boy's whole face light up like something he'd prayed for had finally, actually shown up. He believed it in 1 second. That's the part that got me. He believed it completely, because a kid that age still thinks a mother's promise is a law of nature. And I understood, standing there with a stranger's future in my hands and a caseworker's pen 20 feet away, that I could not let that light go out. Not for him. Not the way mine had gone out 6 years ago. Diane opened the door. Warm air, the smell of crayons and industrial carpet. The woman in the gray blazer stood up, extended a hand, and smiled the professional smile of someone whose whole job is deciding whether people are lying. You must be the partner, she said, her eyes moving over me, cataloging, calculating, landing on the ring and staying there half a beat too long. I'm Karen Walsh, Family Services. I've heard so little about you. She gestured to the 2 empty chairs across the table. Please sit. We've got a lot to cover, and only 2 hours. And little Marcus, from his seat beside her, looked up at me with his mother's eyes and said the words that nearly stopped my heart before we'd even sat down. Hi, Dad, you came. 3 words. That boy looked me dead in the eye and called me Dad without a flicker of hesitation, and I understood 2 things at once. First, that Diane hadn't had time to warn him about anything. He was improvising, same as me. And second, that this 9-year-old was a better actor than I would ever be, because he'd clearly decided in the half-second I walked through the door that I was the man who was going to save his mother, and he was going to sell it with everything he had. Course I came, I said, and I pulled out the chair and sat down beside him like I'd done it 1,000 mornings. Wouldn't miss it, buddy. Karen Walsh watched all of this over the top of her folder. She had the kind of eyes that don't miss much. I'd sat across from eyes like that once, and I remembered exactly how they worked. They weren't cruel. That's the thing people get wrong. She wasn't the villain. She was just a woman whose entire job was to protect kids from adults who lie, and every instinct she had was telling her something in this room didn't add up. Mr. Cole, she said, checking a note. Ryan Cole. Diane mentioned you a few weeks ago, but I have to be honest. The file is thin. No shared address, no joint anything. For a relationship of 8 months that's apparently serious enough to be part of Marcus's stability, there's very little paper. She folded her hands. So, help me understand. Where did you 2 meet? Diane's knee pressed against mine under the table. A warning, a plea. A hardware store, I said, before Diane could reach for it, because I'd learned long ago you answer these questions like you're bored, not like you're afraid. She was buying the wrong kind of anchor bolts for a shelf that was definitely going to come down on somebody's head. I said so. She told me to mind my own business. I glanced at Diane. She's stubborn. It's the first thing I ever learned about her. And Diane, God bless her, she caught it, let out a small, real laugh and said, You were condescending. I was correct. You were both, said Marcus, not looking up from the table, and Karen Walsh's pen actually paused. Because that's the kind of thing a real kid says about 2 real parents, and everybody in that room knew it, and Marcus knew it most of all. 9 years old and he'd just thrown a sandbag on the scale when he felt it tipping. I had to stare at the wall for a second to keep my face steady. Let me stop here for 1 second because I know some of you are watching this and feeling it in your chest. Have you ever had somebody show up for you at the exact moment you'd given up on being shown up for? A stranger even? Somebody who had no reason to help you and did it anyway? If you have, tell me about it down in the comments. I read every single one, and I promise you, we never judge here. All right, back to the room. For the next half hour, Karen Walsh took us apart piece by piece, and Diane and I built a life in real time to survive it. How I was with Marcus, what we did on weekends, whether I understood the responsibility of stepping into a child's life. I answered, from a place I didn't have to fake, because 6 years ago, I'd have given my hands to hear a caseworker ask me those questions and mean them. And slowly, something in that room started to turn. Not trust, not yet, but the tight line of Karen Walsh's mouth loosened by a degree. Diane started to breathe again. Then Karen Walsh set down her pen, looked directly at me, and laid down the trap. "Mr. Cole, what's Marcus's teacher's name?" She smiled, pleasant as anything. "If you're as involved as Diane says, a man who comes to school events, meets the teachers, you'd know. What's his teacher called?" The room went dead silent. Diane froze solid beside me. Because we had never invented this, there'd been no time, no briefing. 30 seconds in a hallway doesn't cover a teacher's name, and Karen Walsh knew it. It was a clean, cold, professional trap with no safe answer, and I watched Diane's face start to crumble because she thought this was the second it all fell apart. And a small voice beside me said, "Dad always calls her the wrong name on purpose, to make me laugh." I turned. Marcus was looking up at me, steady as a rock, and then at Karen Walsh. "He calls her Mrs. Pickle. Her name's Mrs. Pinkerton. He's been calling her Mrs. Pickle since back to school night, and it drives her crazy." The boy rolled his eyes with the practiced exhaustion of a kid who has genuinely suffered a dad's bad joke 100 times. "It's not even funny anymore." I didn't miss a beat. "It's a little funny." "It's not. Mrs. Pickle's a good name and you know it." And Karen Walsh, the wall, the trap layer, the woman whose job was to catch exactly this, looked at the two of us bickering about a teacher's name, and something in her professional certainty wobbled. Because you cannot invent that. Or she thought you couldn't. She didn't know that the man next to the boy was a total stranger, and the boy had just, without a flicker, reached into thin air and built his own father a memory to stand on. A 9-year-old covering for the man who was covering for his mom. I have never in my life been so undone by a child's quick thinking, and I had to look down at the table and press my thumbnail into my palm to keep it together. "Mrs. Pinkerton," Karen Walsh said slowly, writing it down. "I'll note that Mr. Cole has a sense of humor Marcus finds tiresome." And there, just barely, the corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile, but the ghost of one. A truce. And a truce was all we needed for the time we had left. We were maybe 40 minutes in, just past the worst of it, starting to believe we might actually make it to the end of 2 hours. Diane's hand found mine under the table and held on, and for a moment it didn't feel like acting at all. Then the classroom door opened without a knock, and a man walked in. Expensive coat, easy smile, the confidence of someone who has never once been the person waiting to be judged. Karen Walsh looked up, surprised. "Mr. Foster? I didn't schedule you until—" "I know," the man said smoothly, his eyes sweeping the table, landing on me, on the ring, on his son's hand near mine. His smile didn't move, but something behind it went cold and delighted all at once. "But I think you'll want to hear what I have to say, especially about this man my ex-wife claims she's been seeing for 8 months." He pulled out a chair, sat down without being asked, and looked directly at me. "Because I've never seen him before in my life. Have I, Marcus? Have I, Marcus?" The whole room went still. Diane made a small sound beside me. Almost nothing, the sound a person makes when the floor disappears. Because this was the one thing we couldn't out-improvise. A caseworker, you can answer with confidence. A teacher's name a clever boy can invent. But a father, standing right there, saying I've never seen this man before, and asking his own son to confirm it, that was a trap with real teeth, and the jaws were already closing. Richard Foster leaned back in his chair like a man who had already won. I knew the type. I'd met him in a dozen forms across a dozen job sites, the kind who walks into a room and assumes it's his. Expensive coat, good teeth, a watch that cost more than my truck. He'd called child services on the mother of his own son, not because he wanted Marcus. You could see it in about 4 seconds. He didn't even look at the boy. He'd done it because Diane had left him, and men like Richard Foster do not lose things. They break them so nobody else can have them. "Marcus," Richard said again, warm and terrible. "It's okay. Tell the nice lady the truth. You've never met this man, have you? Your mother's just having him pretend. Isn't that right, son?" And I watched a 9-year-old boy get put on a scale that could crush his whole world either way. If he lied for his mother and got caught, Karen Walsh would see it, and Diane would lose him for the lie. If he told the truth, Diane would lose him for the lie she'd already told. Richard Foster had built a trap where a child destroyed his mother, no matter which way he stepped, and he was smiling at his own son while he did it. I couldn't let that boy carry it. I'd spent 6 years carrying a room like this, and I would not watch a child pick up the same weight. So before Marcus could open his mouth, I did the only thing that was true. "He's right," I said. The room turned to me. Diane's head snapped around, her eyes huge and betrayed and terrified. Karen Walsh went very still, her pen hovering. "Marcus has never called me Dad before today," I said, and I looked straight at Karen Walsh, because I was done performing, and it was time to do the only thing 6 years had actually taught me. "That part's true. I'm going to tell you something, and then you can do whatever your job tells you to do. 2 hours ago, I walked into this school to fix a heater. I'd never met Diane Foster in my life. She grabbed my arm in the hallway because a man who was supposed to love her spent the last month convincing you she's unfit, and she panicked, and she reached for the nearest person who looked like he might not fall over. That's me. I fix things. I'm nobody. I have no stake in this room." Richard's smile widened. Karen Walsh's face closed like a door, and I kept going, because the truth wasn't finished. "So let me tell you what I saw in the last 2 hours as a total stranger, with no reason to lie. I watched a mother walk into the worst meeting of her life and hold it together for her kid. I watched a 9-year-old boy so scared of losing his mom that he covered for a man he'd never met. Quick and kind and better than most grown adults would have managed, and no child does that for a mother who hurts him. Kids don't protect the people who scare them. They protect the people who make them feel safe." I turned to Richard for the first time. "You want to know how I know she's a good mother? Because when you put your own son in a trap just now to win a fight against her, that boy's first instinct was still to protect her. That's not fear talking. That's love. You built that, Diane, not him." The room was silent. Diane was crying without a sound, and Richard Foster's smile finally slipped, because the man had walked in expecting to expose a lie, and instead the stranger had handed the caseworker the one thing Richard couldn't fake in return: the truth, out loud, with nothing to gain from it. Karen Walsh set her pen down very slowly. "Mr. Cole," she said, "you understand that you've just admitted this entire relationship was fabricated, that Ms. Foster lied to a child services investigation. I have to put that in my report. I know. That could cost her custody." "It could," I said, "but you'd have found out anyway. You're good at your job, and I'd rather you make your decision on what's real than on how well two scared people can act. Diane didn't lie because she's unfit. She lied because a man with a nice coat convinced a system that a quiet, tired, single mother isn't enough. I know exactly how that feels, because 6 years ago I sat in a room like this one, and I wasn't smooth, and I wasn't rich, and I couldn't perform stable well enough for the people with the folders, and they took my daughter. I haven't tucked her in since she was 4. My voice did something then that I didn't plan, and I let it. So no, I'm not Marcus's father, but I know what this room can take from a person, and I would rather tell you the truth and lose than watch it happen to somebody good all over again." Karen Walsh looked at me for a long, long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, not a caseworker's calculation this time, but a person's. Then she turned to Marcus, and her voice changed completely, gentle in a way it hadn't been all afternoon. "Marcus, I'm going to ask you one question, and I need the truth, and I promise you no answer will get your mom in trouble, okay?" Marcus nodded, white-faced. "Are you safe with your mom? At home, just the two of you. Are you happy?" And Marcus Foster looked at his mother, and then at the man who'd claimed to be his father and then unclaimed it to save her. And this brave, quick, exhausted little boy said, "My mom reads to me every night, even when she's so tired she falls asleep in the middle. She skips dinner sometimes so I can have seconds and thinks I don't notice. I notice everything." He wiped his nose. "I don't want the man in the nice coat. I've never wanted him. I want my mom. And honestly," he looked at me, "I kind of want the heater guy to stay too." And that's when Richard Foster stood up, furious that a room he'd walked into owning had turned completely against him, and said the thing that finally showed everyone exactly who he was. "This is absurd," Richard Foster said, and his voice had lost all its smooth. "You're going to take the word of a handyman and a 9-year-old over mine? I have a home in the hills. I have standing in this community. She has a rented apartment and a man she found in a hallway." He jabbed a finger at Diane. "I don't even want him full-time. I want it on record that she's a liar. so that when I file next month, everyone knows what she really is. That's all Marcus is here. Leverage. A point on the board. He straightened his expensive coat. Now write that down, Ms. Walsh. The room went very quiet, because Richard Foster had just done the one thing no lie could undo. He'd told the truth without meaning to. That's all Marcus is. Leverage. A point on the board. His own son, sitting 6 feet away, had just heard exactly what he was worth to his father, out loud, in a school classroom. Karen Walsh wrote something down. Then she looked up, and when she spoke, her voice was flat and final, the voice of a woman who had just watched a man make her decision for her. I'm writing it down, Mr. Foster. All of it, including the part where you described your son as a point on the board. She closed the folder. I've been doing this 19 years. Do you know what actually tells me a child is safe? Not the house in the hills, not the income. It's watching who a scared kid reaches for, and who he flinches from. Marcus hasn't looked at you once since you walked in. He covered for a stranger to protect his mother. That tells me everything your file couldn't. She turned to Diane, and her whole face softened. Miss Foster, you never should have lied to me. Don't ever do it again. If you'd told me the truth from the start, I'd have been on your side an hour ago. But I've seen unfit mothers. You are not one. My report is going to say so. Diane broke. All the fear she'd been holding for a month came out at once, silent and shaking, both hands over her mouth, and Marcus climbed out of his chair, walked around the table, and wrapped his arms around his mother's neck, and I heard him whisper, I told you it would work, Mom. I told you. Which is when I understood that this little boy had been carrying his mother's fear right alongside her the whole time, telling her at night that it would be okay, being brave for the both of them. 9 years old. I had to look at the wall again. Richard Foster left. No slam, no scene. Men like him don't make scenes they can't win. He just looked at the room that no longer belonged to him and walked out, and I have not thought about him since, because some men defeat themselves the second they open their mouths in front of people who are actually listening. The 2 hours were up. Karen Walsh packed her folder, and at the door she paused in front of me. Up close, the professional wall was gone. It was just a tired woman who'd spent 19 years trying to tell the real ones from the fakes. That was either the most reckless thing I've seen in this job, she said quietly, or the most decent. I genuinely can't tell which. Her eyes moved over my face. 6 years ago. What state? I told her. She was quiet a moment. Then she reached into her bag, wrote a name and number on the back of a card, and pressed it into my hand. She's the best family advocate I know. If your daughter's case was decided the way I think it was, by people who mistook quiet for unstable, it can be looked at again. It's not too late. It's almost never as too late as they let you believe. She glanced back at Diane and Marcus. Good instincts, heater guy. And she left. I stood there holding a card that might give me back my daughter, in a classroom that smelled like crayons, and I could not speak. Diane wiped her face and stood up, and for the first time in 2 hours there was no meeting to survive, no role to play, and we were just two strangers who'd built a marriage in real time, and could now take it apart. I don't know how to thank you, she started. You walked in here and told the truth and risked. Marcus, I said, because I couldn't do the thank you thing. The teacher's name, Mrs. Pickle. I looked at the boy. How'd you come up with that so fast? Marcus shrugged, suddenly shy now that he wasn't saving anyone. You looked nice, and Mom looked really scared, and you had a ring, so I thought, maybe you're the dad she keeps saying is coming. He looked at his shoes. I know she made you up. I'm not a baby, but you came anyway. Nobody ever comes anyway. And there it was, the same sentence, from a 9-year-old, that I'd been living for 6 years. Nobody ever comes anyway. I crouched down to his level, the way I wished someone had crouched down to mine a long time ago. Listen to me, I said. You are the quickest, bravest kid I've ever met. You saved your mom today. Not me. You. Don't you ever let anybody in a nice coat tell you what you're worth. You hear me? He nodded, chin wobbling, and then he hugged me. This kid I'd known for 2 hours, and held on like I was something he'd been promised. Here's what I didn't plan. I called the number on that card. It took 8 months, a lot of paperwork, and more courage than I knew I had, but a year later I sat in a different room with a different folder, and this time somebody had taught me that quiet isn't the same as unfit, and I got weekends with my daughter back. Real ones. And the person who drove 2 hours each way to sit in that waiting room with me every single time, so I wouldn't have to do it alone the way I'd done everything alone for 6 years, was Diane Foster. We didn't rush it. We'd already done the fake version in a classroom. We owed each other the slow, real one. But some nights now, my daughter and Marcus argue over the last of the popcorn on the same couch, and Diane catches my eye over their heads, and I think about how a woman drowning in a hallway grabbed the most forgettable man in the building, and how it turned out I wasn't forgettable at all. I was just waiting, without much hope, for somebody to finally reach into the crowd and pick me. She asked me for 2 hours. It was the first time in years anybody picked me at all. It turned out to be the only time I'll ever need. If somebody ever showed up for you when you'd given up on being shown up for, a stranger, a friend, anybody who had no reason to and did it anyway, I want to hear about it. Tell me your story down in the comments, and tell me where in the world you're watching from tonight. I read every single one. And be honest with me before you go. If a total stranger had grabbed your arm and begged you to save their whole world for 2 hours, would you have walked into that room like I did? Or would you have said you were sorry, and gone to fix the heater, and never known what you missed? There's no wrong answer. There's only the one you'd have to live with. If this story moved you even a little, do me one small kindness. Tap that like button so it finds the next person who needs it, and hit subscribe, because I'm here every week with another story about the kind of love that grabs you by the arm when you've stopped believing anyone ever will. I'm glad you're here.